We begin with the fallout from that stunning allegation from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau yesterday. He says agents of the government of India were involved in the murder of a Canadian Sikh leader.
We are not looking to provoke or escalate. We are simply laying out the facts as we understand them, and we want to work with the government of India to lay everything clear.
The government of India is not surprisingly rejecting the allegation. In a statement, India's Ministry of External Affairs says allegations of government of India's involvement in any act of violence in Canada are absurd and motivated. It goes on to say the allegations seek to shift the focus from Khalistani terrorists and extremists who have been provided shelter in Canada and continue to threaten India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. All of this happens as countries gather in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. Bob Rae is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. He's in New York. Ambassador Rae, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you, David.
I'd like to start, if I could, with the statements from the government of India about the allegations the Prime Minister leveled yesterday, calling them both absurd and motivated and accusing Canada of providing shelter to Khalistani terrorists and extremists. What's your response to that statement from India?
That's disappointing. I don't think anybody who really looks at this objectively would say that Canada has anything to gain from making a statement that the Prime Minister made yesterday. It was not a partisan statement. It was a statement about deep concern based on very reliable information that the government of Canada has, which, by the way, we have shared over the last several weeks with the government of India, engaging in a very energetic, quiet diplomacy process, of which I was aware, and I think it was felt, the Prime Minister felt that it was time to share this information, and we didn't see much coming from the other side, so we decided that we would move forward with it. There's obviously a complex criminal investigation underway, but I don't think the Prime Minister would have made that statement unless he felt it was the best course for the security of our country, which is his primary concern.
You say you didn't see much coming from the other side. Does that mean India wasn't cooperating with your efforts?
No, I'm not going to go any further than that. I'm not authorized to do that. But I would just say that I find the statement today very disappointing, and I don't think it really reflects the reality of the situation. And I think most people understand that. And Prime Minister of a country like Canada is not going to make a statement such as he made to the House of Commons unless he very much believes it to be true and has reason to believe that it's true. And I think our Indian partners must understand that.
Have you had any conversations with your Indian counterpart or other Indian diplomats at the United Nations as part of this quiet diplomacy or in the hours since the Prime Minister did what he did?
No, I've not.
I know Melanie Joly is in New York, and she was going to have dinner with the foreign ministers of the G7 last night. There's a report in the Washington Post that Canada has been pushing its closest allies for weeks, if not months, to raise this allegation with India and to condemn it publicly, but that several countries, including the U.S., have shown a reluctance to do that out of fear of diplomatic backlash from the Modi government. Is this true? Is this your sense of where things are?
I don't really want to get into that kind of speculation. The fact is that statements have been made today by a number of our allies. I think those statements indicate that they have a profound concern about this information and are waiting to see how things unfold after this. I think it's important for the judicial process to take over and the criminal investigation and so on, and that I think is exactly what's going to happen.
They've expressed concern, as what we've seen from Washington and from the United Kingdom, but not condemnation, right? And just today, U.S. President Joe Biden, he delivered a speech at the United Nations. You were there. He didn't raise the allegation, and in fact, Biden said he's pushing.
I wouldn't expect him to.
Well,
I wouldn't expect the president to do that. I think everybody's, as I said, David, and I just stick with it. I think everybody's waiting for the process to to unfold. There's further information to come, and I think that will all take time. But we would not have made this particular announcement unless the Prime Minister was profoundly convinced that it was true.
I wonder, though, and I appreciate that you don't think the president would have raised it in his speech, but he also said he's pushing for India to join the Security Council, touting the importance of the Quad partnership, which includes India, and wanting to deepen that relationship. I mean, how should Canadians interpret this? Is Modi's role as a counterweight to China just too important?
Oh, I wouldn't read that much into it. The fact is that this is a particular issue which Canada has. It affects our security as a sovereign nation, and I think that that's the end of it. That's the beginning of the story, and that's the end of the story, and of the announcement, and then we'll see where the investigation leads and what it leads to. But I think that it would be a mistake to think that this is suddenly going to become a huge global issue when in reality it's an issue which affects us. We're obviously allies of other countries, and the activities of foreign governments on our soil are now well known as something which we've called a public inquiry into, and I think that's the spirit with which the Prime Minister made the announcement. And I think he's made other announcements with respect to the creation of a special security committee of the cabinet and other steps that he's taking to improve the way we can respond to these issues, which I think is entirely a good thing.
But I wonder, Ambassador, why you think our allies and other nations wouldn't necessarily strongly condemn something like this when we've seen them do this with China, with the arbitrary detentions of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. This is an assassination, essentially, in the words of what the Prime Minister spelled out yesterday. Why would you expect a less robust response from our allies than we saw with the detention of the two Michaels?
It's only 24 hours since the Prime Minister made his statement. There's a lot of facts that still have to come out. I'd be a little bit patient if I were you in terms of leaping to any judgments about this.
The Prime Minister made a shocking accusation yesterday that the Indian government or agents of the Indian government are involved in the murder of a Canadian Sikh leader. Hardeep Singh Nijjar was born in 1977 in India's northern state of Punjab, the birthplace of the Sikh religion. He moved to Canada in 1997 and became a citizen in 2015. He lived in Surrey and was a known Sikh separatist leader, supporting the call for an independent Sikh homeland in the Punjab state. He was elected the head of his local temple, and it was outside this temple that he was shot and killed by two masked men on June 18, 2023. In the years before his death, India had designated Nijjar a terrorist for his work as a Sikh separatist. In 2022, Indian officials had announced a cash reward for information that would lead to Nijjar's arrest, accusing him of being involved in an attack on a Hindu priest in India. In the days after his death, one of Nijjar's close associates said Nijjar told him that he had received cryptic warnings from CSIS that he was in danger. BC homicide investigators said the shooting was targeted, but they declined to say who was involved. In hindsight, it's clear the secret intelligence was fueling the public tensions between Trudeau and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi during the G20 summit in India. It also explains why trade talks with India were put on pause, and why just days after the Prime Minister returned home, Trade Minister Mary Ng canceled a trade mission to India. An explanation the Prime Minister made public in Parliament 3 months after Nijjar was murdered.
Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty.
All right, we're going to dig deeper into this story with two national security experts. Jessica Davis is president at Insight Threat Intelligence, and Thomas Junot is an associate professor at the University of Ottawa, specializing in security and intelligence. It's good to have you back. We're having you on a lot this year. Jess, I want to start with your confidence. In how confident do you believe the Prime Minister must be in the intelligence to send his national security advisor, to have the head of CSIS go to India, to raise it with Narendra Modi, and to make this allegation in the House of Commons?
For me, the really big thing here is the allegation in the House of Commons. The level of confidence that he must have to stand up and say what he said, even the hedged language that he used, tells me that it's a very high. And so this to me says that it's really something along the lines of multiple independent corroborating reports. So it's probably not just one human source. It's probably not just one report from allies. It's probably a body of intelligence that points them in this direction, possibly also informed by the criminal investigation that's ongoing.
Right. Thomas, do you agree with that assessment? Do you think that's where we are?
I completely agree with that. And even if all these details are not public, if you take a few steps back in this country, we have done some mistakes. There are some very valid criticism about neglect of security and intelligence issues in general. But if there's one area where there's no precedent, it would be the public politicization of intelligence like this. This is not something that has happened before, and I fully agree with the way Jess just framed it right now.
So when we look at this, because there's been some criticism and suggestion, and that maybe this is a political channel changer, and they're doing something like this for partisan interests. You do not believe that something like this would happen, given the other activity we are aware of with Jody Thomas and David Vigneault, that this is legit?
No, this seems like a really extreme allegation to make, actually, given the seriousness of what we're talking about. There's a murder, serious foreign interference from one of our allies, really, or one of our major trade partners, certainly. And so, to me, while I think it's important that the opposition really hold the Prime Minister to account and have him be more transparent about what the evidence is and continue to share with Canadians information about foreign interference, the idea that this is some sort of partisan channel changer, I think is really far-fetched.
Yeah, and the opposition isn't making that claim. It's just noise. There's always noise about this. The government had to confirm that Mr. Niger was a Canadian citizen because people were raising doubts about that. So Thomas, on this point, the Prime Minister says he isn't trying to provoke or escalate things with India. I don't know how that can be avoided when an allegation like this is made. How do you interpret his assessment that he's just trying to lay out the facts and get cooperation to get answers?
That's a good question, and there's a debate to be had in terms of the optimal response when something like this happens. Right. The strategy that the government has obviously chosen is the name and shame. Go public, be transparent. Exactly why the government made that decision, we don't know, but that's the outcome.
Well, it may have been forced on them because the Globe and Mail had some reporting on it and confronted the Prime Minister's office about it, right?
That may be the case. We don't know that for sure. But if you look at the outcome, the result, which is the name and shame strategy, I think that's the right approach to this. It's a risky one. It's one that definitely carries a diplomatic cost in the short term. This is going to damage what is an important relationship, at least in the short term. But beyond those real costs, the name and shame strategy in general for foreign interference, I think, is the right approach. By being transparent with Canadians, by explaining to Canadians in a calm way what the threat is, what the problem is, what needs to be done about it. Ultimately, that raises the debate on national security issues in a way that we typically haven't done in this country.
Jess, India rejects it. They called it absurd. They say it's a distraction from the Khalistani separatist efforts happening in Canada. What do you take on that? What's your take on that?
It's obvious that they would deny this. This is the kind of thing that states don't do to each other, generally speaking, certainly not trade partners, certainly not people with the kind of relationships that we have with India. And so they're really just trying to brush it away, shove it under the carpet, and probably just actually, they have a sense of impunity around it. So they're not thinking that they're going to suffer any real serious consequences on this issue. So that's part of why we're seeing such, almost flippant attitudes from them on these allegations.
Well, just on the point, Leah West was on the show last night, and Richard Fadden, the former head of CSIS, was on News Network earlier today, and they both came to the same point that they think this criminal investigation may never turn up anything, because if a foreign state was truly involved, they figure these assassins are long gone, and India, based on its comments here, doesn't feel like it's going to cooperate no matter how much Canada asks. So, what is the capacity here, the likelihood here of getting judgment and truth?
I think it's very unlikely. If the shooters are still in Canada, I would be absolutely astonished by that. There's every incentive for if India did sponsor this targeted assassination, to get the people who perpetrated it out of the country so they'll never face any kind of criminal prosecution and certainly no questioning by intelligence services. So I think that there's very little likelihood that that's going to happen. But there's still the possibility that the investigation could yield criminal charges, which would be interesting, even if they don't come to fruition.
Right, so like a criminal charge in absentia, that sort of thing. Tama, I mean, where do you think this potentially goes?
At this point, it's very difficult to say, but building on everything Jess said in terms of the low likelihood that would succeed, beyond that, especially given that low likelihood, that makes it even more important for the government to continue being transparent about this, to explain to Canadians what's going on, to explain to Canadians what are the options moving forward, to explain to Canadians what the government is doing and will do, in part to reassure the Sikh community in Canada, which very justifiably feels very vulnerable right now, but other minority communities, Iranian Canadians, Chinese Canadians, who are also the victims of intimidation and blackmail, even though not necessarily assassination, that's an extreme form, but lesser violent forms. That happens a lot in this country. So even if the prosecution doesn't work, the government can still, by being transparent, play a role here in signaling to Canadians that it's taking this seriously.
So, Tama, there was a report in the Washington Post that Canada had been reaching out to allies hoping to build a coalition to condemn this, but were rebuffed. That has been refuted by Melanie Joly in a statement saying the reporting is false, and the only foreign minister they spoke with was India's foreign minister in advance of this. But still, our allies are kind of treading lightly on this, expressing concern, not condemnation, because of India's important role and its dominance in world affairs. How do you expect to see Canada's allies approach this going forward?
I think the expectation by some in the media, in public comment, among the opposition, that we should expect more than timid support from allies is fantasy. Given the importance of relations with India for every other country, given given the fact that this is a Canadian problem, it's not the problem of our other allies, we shouldn't expect them to do much more. When we had the dispute with Saudi Arabia in 2018, some were expecting some of our allies to come on our side and to support us and criticize Saudi Arabia. That didn't happen, and we shouldn't expect it now either.
So Jess, this is happening as we have, on the same day this claim was made, Justice Ugg started her mandate to lead the public inquiry into foreign interference. And up to now, while it's serious, I'm not minimizing any things we've talked about, it's been about pressure and intimidation and maybe some, nomination stacking, for example. Now we're talking about an assassination of a Sikh activist, a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. How does that change the inquiry going forward? Does that need to broaden what it's looking at? And because it's got a specific mandate and a set amount of time.
I think it does two things that are really important. First of all, it silences the China-only crowd. There was a group of people who thought that the inquiry should only be about foreign interference in China. This effectively silences them because the seriousness of this incident cannot be understated. The second thing that it does is it really pushes the inquiry to start looking at ways to make foreign interference detectable and disruptable in Canada. So the big thing for me here is that Canada failed to prevent this assassination. We need to be able to figure out ways to make the RCMP and CSIS more able to detect and disrupt these kinds of plots going forward, because this is not the only time this kind of thing is going to happen in Canada.
Tama, quick final thoughts from you.
Just to add on the issue of broadening the scope of the inquiry beyond China to other states like India, Iran, Russia, that was the right move. This also emphasizes the point that foreign interference is not just about interference in the electoral or the democratic process. This is not that. What India has done is transnational repression. A lot of the foreign interference by Iran in particular is intimidation of Iranian Canadian activists. That also has to be part of the broader conversation on what can we do better to counter that.